The metal gates of the strict regime colony opened with a muffled creak, as if reluctantly releasing yet another man exhausted by years of deprivation. Damir Arslanov stepped across the threshold, clutching a bag of personal belongings, everything that remained of his former life. 47 years old, 9 of which had been spent behind bars. 9 years, stolen from him through villainy, lies, and betrayal. The air outside seemed different, sharper, saturated with the smells of the city he had managed to forget. Damir stopped a few steps from the gate, closed his eyes, and inhaled deeply. Freedom, a word he whispered to himself every night before sleep, like a prayer. Now it was here, close, but for some reason it brought no relief.
Only emptiness. The sentence had been overturned due to newly discovered circumstances. The supervisory instance had re-examined the case and acknowledged that the elements of a crime were missing. 9 years of life had been erased with a single piece of paper. There were no apologies, just a dry formulation in the court ruling. Damir did not expect apologies. He knew that justice here worked according to its own laws, where human life is merely a statistic. He stood at the gate for about 5 minutes, trying to get used to the thought that he could simply pick up and leave. No one would call out to him. No one would demand he stand in formation. No one would drive him to work. A strange, almost frightening feeling.
In these years, he had become so accustomed to the regime, to the strict schedule, that freedom seemed something unreal, wrong. Damir shook his head, chasing away the illusion, and headed toward the bus stop. The taxi took him to the edge of the city, to where the old cemetery began. Damir paid the driver with crumpled bills, given to him upon his release, along with the compensation for the lost years.
Someone was arranging artificial flowers. Someone was simply standing, immersed in their own memories. Damir walked along the central alley, counting the rows. He knew this place by heart. Relatives had sent him a photograph of the grave 2 years ago, when he was finally able to receive letters after a new transfer to another zone. Irina, his wife, the woman for whom he was ready to do anything. She died 1 year after his arrest. That is what they told him. Heart failure, they wrote in a short letter. Damir did not believe it then. Irina was only 38 years old. She had never complained about her health. But what could he do from behind bars? Only rack his brain with questions to which there were no answers.
On the way to the grave, he recalled their last meeting before the arrest. An ordinary morning. They were having breakfast in the kitchen. Irina was laughing at his clumsy attempts to cook an omelet. He kissed her goodbye, said he would return by evening. He never returned. They took him straight from the office. Handcuffed, they led him past the astonished employees. The charge: embezzlement of company funds, forgery of documents, fraud. Everything had been organized by Ogarev, his partner, whom he trusted like a brother. The grave was in the far corner of the cemetery, under an old maple tree. A simple gray monument with the name and dates engraved. Damir knelt before the tombstone, placed the bouquet of white chrysanthemums, her favorite flowers. He ran his palm over the cold stone, tracing the letters, Irina Arslanova. "Forgive me," whispered Damir, and his voice broke. "Forgive me that I couldn't protect you, that I couldn't be there." He sat on his heels, his head dropped onto his hands, and for the first time in all these years, he allowed himself a moment of weakness. Tears burned his eyes, but did not flow. He had forgotten how to weep somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd year of detention. There, in the colony, tears were a luxury one could not afford. Here, alone with the memory of the only person who believed in his innocence, he wanted to cry, but could not. Memories rushed in like a wave. How they met at the wedding of mutual friends, where Irina stood by the window with a glass of juice and a bored look. How he approached her, trying to impress her with clever phrases, and she laughed and said he was trying too hard. How they walked through the nocturnal city, talking about everything and nothing, and he realized he had fallen hopelessly in love. How he proposed to her on the grass in the park, where they had organized a picnic under the stars. She cried with happiness, and he swore he would always be by her side, that he would protect her from everything in the world. He couldn't. He didn't save her. Damir didn't know how long he sat there. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe half an hour. Time flowed strangely, as if trying to compensate for those 9 years that had been torn from his life. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed. The cemetery was gradually emptying. People were leaving for their homes, to their living affairs and worries. Finally, he stood up, brushed off his knees, and prepared to leave. He needed to sort out his documents, to start a new life. Although, what kind of life is this without Irina? A void that cannot be filled with anything. He took a step away from the grave, then another. "But what are you doing at my mom's grave?" The voice rang out right next to him, thin, childlike, with notes of wariness. Damir froze, then turned slowly. In front of him stood a little girl of about 9 years old. Her dark hair was gathered in a ponytail. Large brown eyes examined him carefully. She wore a simple dress in a small check pattern, slightly worn, and a thin jacket. In her hands she held a wilted flower, which she had probably picked on the way. Damir felt the ground slipping from under his feet. The girl's face, it was painfully familiar. Fine features, a slightly upturned nose, a mole above the upper lip, exactly like Irina's. He had seen her childhood photos hundreds of times. Even the shape of the eyes, even the shape of the eyebrows, everything reminded him of his wife. This could not be a coincidence. He began, but his voice betrayed him. Damir cleared his throat. "I am a friend of your mom."
An old friend. The girl tilted her head to the side, studying him with that directness specific only to children. "But why have I never seen you? You haven't come before." "I was far away, very far away," Damir managed to say. "What is your name?" "Marta," the girl answered. "Marta Ogoreva." The name hit him harder than a baton blow to the ribs. Valentin Ogorev, his former business partner, the man who framed him, organized his arrest, and appropriated the company. Could it really be? "Damir," he uttered, trying to speak calmly. "Tell me, Marta, but your mom, what was her name?" "Irina Arslanova." The girl nodded toward the monument. "It says so there. She died when I was only a few months old." "Grandfather Valentin says I can't remember her." Damir grabbed the edge of the tombstone so as not to fall. A few months. Irina died when the girl was a few months old. It means Marta must be 9 years old, exactly as many years as he had been imprisoned. It means Irina was pregnant when they arrested him. Pregnant, and he didn't know. Or she knew but didn't get the chance to tell him. "Marta," he crouched down in front of her. "But who told you about Lon? What do you know about her?" The girl shrugged her shoulders. "Almost nothing. Grandfather Valentin forbids talking about her. He says it's a sad topic and we shouldn't dig up the past. And at home, generally, I'm not allowed to ask." "Stepan, that's my dad." She stumbled on the last word, as if this word was difficult for her. "He gets angry if I mention Mom." "Stepan?" asked Damir, though he already understood. Stepan Ogorev, Valentin's son, a 30-year-old idler who had lived off his father his whole life and knew nothing other than spending other people's money. "Well, yes, he adopted me. More precisely, grandfather says he adopted me. But Stepan doesn't love me." Marta said this so matter-of-factly, as if talking about the weather. "He often yells. Sometimes he hits me. Grandfather says that's how it should be, that I must obey." Damir felt everything inside him tighten with rage. They were beating her, his daughter, because she was his daughter.
He knew this with his entire being, even before tests and verifications. The dates matched, the face was the same, and the Ogorev family had taken his daughter. Marta, but where do you live? With this Stepan. Aha. We have a big house on the outskirts, but I don't like it there. Stepan is always mean, and Grandfather Valentin forces me to call Stepan Dad, although I don't want to. He isn't the real dad, is he? That is correct, Damir rasped. Listen, but how did you get here? Who brought you to the cemetery? No one. I came alone. Sometimes I run away from home when everyone is sleeping, or when Grandfather leaves on business. It's quiet here, and no one scolds me. I come to Mom and tell her how I'm doing. Although she doesn't answer, of course. A 9-year-old girl wandering alone through a cemetery. Marta, can you tell me more? About how you live? The girl looked at him with fear. But why? You are a stranger. Grandfather says you aren't allowed to tell strangers about the family. If I blabber, they will punish me. I am not a stranger, Damir said quietly. I am a friend of your mom. I want to help you. Marta fell silent, studying him. In her eyes there was a weariness so adult that Damir's heart clenched. A child shouldn't look at the world like that, warily, expecting a trap. Okay, she said finally. Only you won't tell Grandfather, right? Otherwise he'll say he'll send me to the orphanage if I speak out of turn.
He always says that when I do something wrong. I won't tell, promised Damir, although inside everything was boiling. Tell me. And Marta told him. She told how she was adopted immediately after her mother's death, when she was only a few months old. How Grandfather Valentin told her she should be grateful they took her into the family, that without them she would have ended up in an orphanage. How Stepan disliked her from day one, called her foreign blood and a burden. How her room was turned into the grandfather's office, and she was moved to the pantry on a pile of old blankets. How they forbade her from asking questions about her mom, about the past, about anything. Stepan says I must be silent and obey, Marta spoke quietly, and if I don't obey, he hits me with a belt. Once he hit me so hard that I couldn't sit for 3 days. Grandfather said it was correct, that this is how they educate me, that I must know my place. Damir listened, and with every word, the rage within him grew. They took his daughter, forced her to live in a pantry, beat her, and all this time he sat in prison, not knowing he had a child. Marta, but about your mom, did they tell you why she died? Grandfather said her heart gave out, that she was weak and couldn't cope with childbirth and stress, but I don't believe it. Mom in the photos is so beautiful and strong. How could her heart give out? I don't know, Damir answered honestly, but I will definitely find out. Marta looked at him with a hope that tore his heart apart. Really? You will find out what happened to Mom? I promise. They stood a little longer at the grave. Damir didn't know what to say, didn't know how to explain to the girl who he really was. Not now. First, he had to find out everything, gather evidence, understand what happened to Irina, and then he would take his daughter. I have to go, said Marta, looking at the sky. Soon Grandfather will wake up from his afternoon nap, and if he sees that I'm not there, there will be a scandal. He doesn't like it when I leave without permission. Go, Damir nodded, but Marta, be careful. Okay. And if something happens, if you feel very bad, he took out of his pocket the phone he received upon release and dictated the number. Remember this number. Call me if you need help. The girl nodded, repeating the digits in a whisper to memorize them. Then she turned and ran toward the cemetery exit, fixing her ponytail as she went. Damir watched her until she disappeared around the bend of the alley, a small figure in a worn dress, running along the cemetery paths, his daughter. He remained alone before Irina's grave, sank to his knees and covered his face with his hands. Everything he thought, everything he knew, collapsed in an instant. He has a daughter they stole from him,
a daughter they beat and humiliate. And Irina, Damir did not believe in heart failure. Too many coincidences. A death too convenient for Ogoryev. "I will bring her back," he whispered, looking at the monument. "I will bring back our little girl, Irina, I swear to you, and I will find out what happened to you. Whatever it may be, I will find out the truth." The wind rustled the maple leaves overhead, as if in answer. Damir stood up, wiped his face with his sleeve, and headed toward the exit. He had a goal. For the first time in 9 years, a living, real goal, worth fighting for. He would find the truth, and he would take his daughter from the claws of those who stole his life. Ogoryev would pay for everything, for the betrayal, for the stolen years, for Irina, for Marta. Damir walked along the cemetery alley, and a plan was already forming in his mind. Tomorrow he would begin to act. Tomorrow his real fight would begin. Not for freedom, he had already obtained that, but for justice, for his daughter, for his wife's memory. Morning found Damir in a tiny rented room on the outskirts of the city. He had barely slept. All night he tossed on the narrow bed, replaying in his mind the meeting with Marta, his daughter. Every time he repeated these words to himself, something tightened inside. 9 years. 9 years he didn't know of her existence. She was growing up in his enemy's house, enduring beatings and humiliation. When the first rays of sun broke through the thin curtains, Damir got up, washed with cold water, and got dressed. He was wearing the same clothes he had left the colony in, worn jeans and a simple shirt. He needed to buy something new, but that could wait. There were more important matters now. He took a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, on which the day before he had written the name Albina Melnikova, a former colleague of Irina. They had worked together, had been close friends. If anyone knew what happened to Irina after his arrest, it was Albina.
Damir found her phone number through old contacts that had miraculously survived in his address book. He called the night before and arranged to meet. They met in a small cafe in the city center. Albina sat at a table by the window. She had aged. Her hair was touched with gray. Wrinkles had appeared around her eyes. 44 years old, but she looked older. Seeing Damir, she flinched and stood up to meet him. "Damir, God, I didn't believe you were really out." Her voice trembled. "When you called, I thought it was a prank." "It's not a prank." He sat opposite her, looking carefully into her eyes. "Albina, I need to know the truth."
"What happened to Irina?" She averted her gaze. "I don't know everything, but what I do know hasn't given me peace all these years. Tell me, everything you remember." Albina inhaled deeply, as if gathering her strength. "After your arrest, Irina was in shock. She couldn't believe you were guilty. She said it was a mistake, that you were framed. But there was no evidence, and the investigation conducted the case as if you were a hardened criminal. Irina tried to find a lawyer, raised money, but it was all useless. The trial took place quickly. They convicted you, and she simply collapsed." Damir listened silently, clenching his jaw. About 1 week after the trial, Valentin Ogoryev came to her. He introduced himself as your partner, said he wanted to help. Irina believed him. She was in such a state that she grasped at any straw. Ogoryev convinced her that you were indeed guilty, that he himself discovered the violation in accounting, that you were hiding your shady dealings from her. "Son of a bitch," hissed Damir. "He set it all up himself, and then instilled in her that I was a criminal. I tried to dissuade her. I told her that Ogoryev cannot be trusted, but she didn't listen. She was pregnant, Damir, in the 3rd month. Stress, panic, hormones, all this made her vulnerable. Ogoryev took advantage of it. He came to her almost every day, said he was taking care of her, that he would help with money, with housing. He played the role of the kind uncle, trying to save a poor woman from disgrace.
Did she tell him about the pregnancy? Yes, about 1 month after your arrest. I was there when she confessed to him. Ogoryev pretended to be concerned, said the child needs stability, that Irina must think about the future. He offered her money, help with doctors. Irina agreed. What was left for her to do? She was alone. Albina fell silent, wiping away the tears that appeared. And then she disappeared. Simply disappeared. That was 2 months after your arrest. Irina stopped answering calls, didn't come to meetings. I went to her home. The apartment was empty. Neighbors said they saw her being taken away in a car. A black Jeep, expensive.
I tried to find out what happened, but no one knew anything. And what did they tell you later? 8 months later, Ogorev called me. He said Irina had died, heart failure. Everything happened quickly. The doctors didn't manage to help her. He said the funeral had already taken place, that he organized everything. I didn't believe a single word of his, but what could I do? I went to the police, but they told me the death is officially registered. There is a doctor's conclusion. Damir felt rage filling him from the inside. It means he killed her or drove her to death. I don't know Damir, but I am sure he is hiding something. Everything worked out too conveniently for him. You in prison, Irina dead. The business completely under his control. But the child? Did you know what happened to the child? Albina shook her head. No. Ogorev said the child died together with the mother. That's what I believed all these years. Why do you ask? Because the child is alive. Her name is Marta. She is 9 years old. Ogorev adopted her. She lives in his house and they beat her. Albina turned pale, covering her mouth with her hand. God, he took her for himself. Why? I don't know, but I will find out, and I will take her from there. They talked a little more. Albina gave him a few names, people who might know something extra. Damir wrote everything down in a notebook, thanked her, and left the cafe. The picture was beginning to take shape, but evidence was needed, solid, irrefutable evidence. Damir spent the next 3 days gathering information. He spoke with Irina's former colleagues, with neighbors, with people who had seen her in the last weeks of her life. Gradually, he reconstructed the chronology of events. Irina had indeed been under strong psychological pressure. Ogorev manipulated her, convinced her that Damir was a criminal, that she must forget about him and think about the child. One of the neighbors said he saw Irina being taken away in a car. She was pale, barely standing on her feet. Beside her walked a man in an expensive suit. By the description, it was Ogorev. They got into the Jeep and left. No one saw Irina again. Damir went to the civil registry archive to obtain Irina's death certificate. They issued him a copy. He studied the document and discovered the first discrepancy. Date of death, August 15th, year 2016. Time, 14:30. Place, MedLife Private Clinic, belonging to Ogorev. Damir clenched the paper in his hand. Of course, everything led to him. Damir headed to the maternity hospital where Irina had been monitored during pregnancy. He was lucky. The head physician turned out to be an understanding woman, and, learning about the situation, agreed to pull up the archive. Here is Irina Arslanova's file, she said, handing him a folder. All the records are here. Damir flipped through the file. The entries were made regularly. The doctor's handwriting changed, but everything was documented accurately. And here it was, the last appointment. August 15th, year 2016, 1500 hours exactly. The entry read, "The consultation was conducted by Dr. Svetlana Kovaleva, and the consultation time was from 1500 hours exactly to 1540 minutes. Can I get a copy of this page?" asked Damir, feeling his heartbeat accelerate. Of course, Damir Arslanov. I saw your story on the news. What they did to you is horrible. If this copy helps restore justice, take it.
Damir walked out of the maternity hospital with the copy of the medical file. Everything connected.
The death certificate indicated the time 14:30, but at 1500 hours sharp, Irina was alive, sitting in the doctor's office. It is impossible to be dead at 14:30 and sit at a consultation with a gynecologist. This was concrete proof of forgery. He headed to the MedLife clinic. There, the administrator met him, a woman of about 50 years old with a cold gaze. "I want to receive the medical documents regarding the death of Irina Arslanova," said Damir, showing the certificate. "Are you a relative? Husband? Here is my passport." The administrator frowned, checked the documents, and nodded. "Wait here." She went into the archive and returned 10 minutes later with a thin folder. "Here is everything that exists."
The death conclusion was signed by Dr. Kirill Zotov. "He no longer works for us. He resigned." Damir opened the folder. The conclusion was brief. Heart failure. Doctor's signature. Clinic stamp. Everything looked official, but something was wrong. But where is Zotov now? Do you have his contacts? No. He resigned of his own accord. The address is indicated in the personnel file, but I cannot give it to you without permission. Damir left the clinic holding the copy of the conclusion. He checked the doctor's name through acquaintances he still had from the old days. It turned out that Zotov was registered at an address that belonged to one of Ogorev's firms. Coincidence? Unlikely. The next step was Child Protective Services. Damir came there with his passport and marriage certificate with Irina. The employee at Child Protective Services, a young woman, listened to him and frowned. "You say the child is your daughter, but here, in the adoption file, it is indicated that the biological father is unknown. Show me the file." She hesitated, but still brought a thick folder. Damir flipped through the documents. An application for Valentin Ogorev for the adoption of Marta, the birth certificate, where there was a dash in the father column, and a letter, allegedly written by Irina before her death. Damir unfolded the letter and understood immediately. It was a fake. The handwriting was similar, but not identical. The letters were traced too straight, without Irina's usual negligence. The signature, a crooked oval, nothing in common with her real signature, where there were always 2 loops and a flourish. "This is a fake," said Damir, showing the letter to the employee. "My wife could not write this after her death." "What do you mean?" "Look, date of death in the certificate, August 15th. Date of the letter, the 18th. How could he write 3 days after death?" The woman turned pale, looking at the documents. I don't know. This is indeed strange. It must be verified." "Verify it, and I will go to the police." Damir walked out of Child Protective Services with copies of all documents. Now he had enough material to start an official investigation. He headed to the Department for Investigating Cold Cases. He was met by investigator Elena Ostakova, a woman of about 40 years old with a sharp gaze. She listened to him, examined the documents, and nodded. "Indeed, there are many discrepancies here. I will take this case. We will have to conduct a handwriting analysis, pull up the archives, question witnesses. This will take time. How long? Minimum 1 month, maybe more. I don't have that much time. My daughter lives in this man's house, and they beat her." Elena looked at him with compassion. "I understand, but without evidence, we cannot take the child. We must act according to the law. I will speed up the process as much as I can, and you try to gather additional testimonies, recordings of conversations, witness statements, anything that can help." Damir walked out of the police station with a heavy feeling. 1 month. 1 month during which Marta would endure beatings and humiliation. He couldn't simply wait. He had to act. He returned to his room and began to plan. If Ogoriev thinks he will get away with everything, he is sorely mistaken. Damir went through the hell of the colony, lost 9 years of life, learned about his wife's death and his daughter's existence. Now he would stop at nothing to get Marta back and expose Ogoriev.
The next day, he went to the cemetery again. He hoped to meet Marta there and was not mistaken. The girl sat at her mother's grave, hugging her knees. "Hi," said Damir quietly, sitting down next to her. "Hi," she raised her eyes to him. "You came again?" "I promised I would help." "Marta, tell me, can you record Stepan's conversation on a phone, when he yells at you or threatens you?" The girl frowned. "I don't have a phone. Grandfather says it's too early for me." "Then I will give you mine, the old one. It's small. You will be able to hide it. You will record everything he says. This will help me take you from there." "Take me where?" "To me."
I am your real father, Marta. Your mom was my wife, and you are my daughter. The girl froze, looking at him with wide open eyes. Really? Really. I will prove it, but I need your help. Marta slowly nodded. Hope appeared in her eyes. That very hope that hadn't extinguished in all these years. Hope that someone would take her from this hell. Okay. The girl hid the phone in her jacket pocket. I will do everything you say, Dad. She pronounced the last word uncertainly, as if tasting it. Damir felt his breath catch. Dad. How long he had dreamed of hearing this word, and here it rang from the lips of the daughter he didn't even know. Everything will be fine, he promised, hugging her shoulders. I will take you.
Very soon, Marta nodded and pressed herself against him. Damir stroked her head, feeling something inside break and rebuild at the same time. His daughter. Finally, he found her, and now he wouldn't let go. Investigator Elena Ostakova didn't waste time. Already the day after the conversation with Damir, she began the official verification. She requested all documents regarding Irina Arslanova's case from the MedLife clinic, pulled up the court archives regarding Damir's own case. She sent the letter with the image of the signature for expertise. She coordinated every step with the prosecutor's office, understanding that this case could gain wide resonance. Damir, meanwhile, continued his own investigation. He met with people who had once worked with Ogarev, tried to find those who had seen Irina in the last days of her life. Every conversation added new details to the overall picture, but the main thing, direct evidence of Ogarev's guilt, was still missing. The breakthrough happened 10 days later. Marta passed him the phone with the recording. Damir listened to it in his room, and with every minute, his face turned to stone. On the recording, Stepan's voice was clearly audible. Rude, drunk, mean. Have you completely lost your mind? Who gave you permission to touch my things? I just wanted to clean up. Marta's quiet voice, trembling with fear. Clean up? But who are you to decide what to do? You live here out of charity, is that clear? Out of charity. If it weren't for grandfather, you'd be in an orphanage. Forgive me, I won't do it again. Shut up. I'm fed up with your apologies. You know what will happen if you complain to anyone. If you say even one word about our family, I know. Say what will happen. They will send me to the orphanage. The girl's voice broke into sobs. Correct. And there it will be 100 times worse for you than here. So shut up and do what is ordered. And now get out of my office, and don't let me see your face around here. The sound of a slammed door. Then silence and the muffled crying of a child. Damir stopped the recording. He closed his eyes. He was humiliating a 9-year-old girl, intimidating her, destroying her psychologically. There were no direct threats of physical violence on the recording, but the tone, the words, the manner of communication all spoke of systematic abuse. He copied the file and sent it to Elena. She listened to the recording and immediately summoned him. This is serious evidence, she said when Damir arrived in her office. Psychological violence against a child is a threat, but I need more. We need evidence of physical violence, medical certificates, statements from neighbors or acquaintances. Can you get anything else? Marta said they beat her. She had traces of old bruises on her arms. It needs to be documented. Photographs, medical examination. Without this, the case will be weak. Ogarev is an influential man. He has good lawyers.
We need to gather maximum evidence so he cannot wiggle out. I understood. I will do everything necessary. Elena looked at him with understanding. Damir, I know how hard it is for you right now, but act carefully. Do not make direct contact with Ogorev. Do not provoke him. This can harm the child. He nodded, although rage was tearing him apart inside. Every day Marta spent in Ogorev's house was torture for him. But Elena was right. He had to act through the law, otherwise Ogorev would escape responsibility. Meanwhile, the results of the handwriting expertise arrived. The conclusion was unequivocal. The letter attached to the adoption file was not written by Irina Arslanova. The signature was executed by another person. The attempt at imitation was obvious. Elena summoned the Child Protective Services employee who had processed the adoption. He, a man of about 50 years old, was nervous and confused in his statements. I don't remember all the details, he mumbled. It was a long time ago. The documents were in order. I checked everything according to instruction. Did you check the mother's handwriting? Did you compare the signature? Elena asked harshly. Well, visually, yes. It seemed to me that everything was normal. It seemed to you. But did Ogorev offer you money for quick processing? The man turned pale. I am not obliged to answer such questions without a lawyer. That means he offered. Fine, you may go, but be ready for interrogation as a witness. When the Child Protective Services employee left, Elena turned to Damir. He took a bribe, it's obvious, but it's hard to prove now. Ogorev knows how to cover his tracks. Nevertheless, we have falsified documents, we have the discrepancy in the dates of death. This is sufficient to raise the question of the adoption's legality. But what about the doctor, the one who signed the death conclusion? Zotov. We found him. He lives in the suburbs, works in a private clinic. Tomorrow, we go to him. The next day, they went to Zotov. The doctor met them with caution, but let them into the house. It was a large villa in a quiet neighborhood, clearly beyond the means of an ordinary doctor. What do you want? Asked Zotov, sitting in an armchair. Information about the death of Irina Arslanova. Elena put the report in front of him. Did you sign this document? Zotov took the paper, scanned it with his eyes, and nodded. Yes, it is my signature. What is wrong with it? The time of death is indicated incorrectly. We have proof that at the indicated time the woman was alive. Explain how this is possible. The doctor turned pale, clutching the paper in his hands. Maybe I mistook the time. It happens when there is a lot of work. It does not happen, said Elena harshly. Time of death is one of the key parameters. A doctor cannot make a mistake of several hours. Who paid you for falsifying the documents? No one. I did my job honestly. Then explain why you resigned immediately after drawing up this report, and why your domicile is registered at an address that belongs to Valentin Ogorev. Zotov was silent, looking at the floor. Damir couldn't take it anymore, and took a step forward. She was alive when you signed the document. Yes. Ogorev paid you to register the death backdated. When did she really die? The doctor raised his head. Fear could be read in his eyes. I cannot speak. If I say, he will destroy me. He has already destroyed you, said Damir. You are an accomplice to a crime, forgery of documents, possibly complicity in murder. Prison awaits you. The only way to ease your fate is to tell the truth. Zakov covered his face with his hands. She died on August 23rd. I don't know from what cause. Ogorev called me, said I needed to register the death backdated on the 15th. He offered me money, a lot of money. I accepted. I signed the report, dated it the 15th. I thought it was just a bureaucratic loophole, that the family wanted to obtain the death certificate faster. I didn't know something serious was involved. Where did she die? Asked Elena. In that house, in Ogorev's house.
They called me there, told me the woman felt bad. When I arrived, she was already dead. Ogorev said she fell and hit her head, but I saw on her neck there were strange marks, as if she had been strangled. Damir felt everything freeze inside him.
They killed her. Ogorev killed Irina. Why didn't you notify the police? Asked Elena. I was afraid. Ogorev is an influential man. He threatened that if I said a single word, they would find me dead in a ditch. I believed him. I took the money and resigned. I moved here, hoping everything would be forgotten. Elena noted the statements and forced Zotov to sign the protocol. Now they had a confession. This changed everything. While the investigation was ongoing, Elena involved the guardianship authority. They were entrusted with the task of conducting an unplanned verification of Marta's living conditions in the Ogorev family home. Damir could not be present at the verification, but Elena promised to keep him updated. The verification took place 3 days later. The inspector from Child Protection, a woman of about 40 years old, arrived at Ogorev's house without warning. Stepan opened the door, visibly displeased. What do you want? Verification of the living conditions of the minor Marta Ogoreva.
According to the law, we have the right to conduct such verifications without prior notification. Stepan tried to object, but the inspector walked past him into the house. She inspected the dwelling, spoke with Marta in private, photographed the living conditions. What she saw shocked even her, despite her many years of experience. Marta did not sleep in a room, but in a storage room. A pile of old blankets and a pillow without a case lay on the floor. The little girl had almost no belongings: a few t-shirts, a pair of jeans, old sneakers, a school uniform. All of these were piled into a cardboard box in the closet. "Where is your room?" the inspector asked. "Over there. Grandfather Valentin occupies it," Marta answered softly. "He said I have to endure it for a while, that soon they will do renovations and I will return. But that was 2 years ago." "And what is this?" The inspector pointed to the bruises on the girl's arms. Marta averted her gaze. "I fell." "Don't lie to me, Marta. I can see this isn't from a fall. Who beats you?" The little girl remained silent, pressing her lips together. The inspector sat down in front of her. "Listen, I am here to help you, but you must tell the truth. If they are hurting you, I will take you away from here." "You will be safe." Marta raised her tear-filled eyes to her. "Stepan, he beats me with his belt when I do something wrong. Grandfather says it's correct, that this is how he educates me." "All right, show me where they beat you." The little girl lifted her t-shirt. On her back were traces of old blows, long stripes, already faded but still visible. The inspector photographed everything and noted the statements. Then she called for Stepan and Valentin Ogorev. The latter appeared from his office, a tall, gray-haired man with an arrogant expression. "What is the problem?" he asked in a cold tone. "The problem is that a child is living in a closet and is being subjected to physical violence. This is a serious violation of children's rights. I will draw up a report, and a decision will be made regarding the limitation of your parental rights." "You don't have the right," Stepan had an outburst. "It's our house, and we educate the child as we deem necessary." "You are not educating, you are torturing," the inspector said harshly. "If this is the case, I will personally ensure that you are prosecuted." Valentin Ogorev looked at her with poorly concealed fury. "You will regret this. I know people who can solve any problem." Threatening a public official during the performance of their duties, add that to the list of charges. The inspector turned to Marta. "Gather your things, little girl. You are coming with me." "Where?" asked Marta, frightened. "To a social center." "Temporarily, until the guardianship issue is resolved. No one will touch you there." Marta quickly gathered her few belongings into a bag. Ogorev and Stepan stood by, not daring to intervene. The inspector took the little girl by the hand and led her towards the exit. "This isn't the end," Ogorev threw at her from behind. "For you, it is exactly the end," the inspector replied, and slammed the door. Elena called Damir that same evening. They took Marta from Ogorev's house. She is at the center now, but it's temporary. I have already filed the application for her transfer to you as the biological parent.
A DNA test will have to be done to officially confirm paternity. When? Tomorrow. Come to the laboratory. I'll send you the address. Marta will be there too. Damir did not sleep all night. Tomorrow he would see his daughter. Tomorrow a new chapter of their lives would begin, and Ogorev would answer for everything he had done. The next day he came to the laboratory. Marta was standing in the hallway with the inspector. Seeing him, she jumped to her feet and rushed to him. "Dad!" Damir caught her in his arms, held her tight to his chest. She was so small, so fragile. "My daughter, everything is fine, little girl," he whispered. "Everything will be fine now." The DNA test was done quickly. They promised the results in 3 days. Damir spent a few hours with Marta, walking in the park, talking, getting to know each other.
She told him about school, about how she dreamed of a real family. He listened, and his heart broke with pain and love at the same time. When it came time to say goodbye, Marta didn't want to let him go. "Will you come tomorrow?" "Absolutely. Every day, until they give you to me." "And will they give me to you?" "They will, I promise you." 3 days later, the test results came. Paternity was confirmed. Damir was her biological father. This was official, undeniable proof. Elena immediately filed the documents for the annulment of the adoption and Marta's transfer to Damir. Simultaneously, she opened a criminal case against Valentin and Stepan Ogorev. Forgery of documents, illegal adoption, torture of a child, threats, and, concerning Valentin, involvement in the death of Irina Arslanova. The case was publicized. The press picked up the story about the businessman who framed his partner, killed his wife, and illegally adopted his child. Ogorev tried to pay his way out, hired the best lawyers, but there was too much evidence. Zodov's confession, the recordings of Stepan's discussions, the photos of the beatings, the falsified documents, the inconsistencies in the dates, all of these added up to a concrete case. Valentin Ogorev was arrested 1 week after the case was opened. Stepan was charged with the torture of a minor. Both were detained until the trial. Damir stood at the window of his room and looked at the city. The battle had been won, but the war was not yet over. The trial, the judgment, the final decision regarding Marta followed. But he knew that now everything would be fine. He had recovered his daughter, and Ogorev would pay for everything in full. The trial began on a cold October morning. The courtroom of the city tribunal was full of journalists, lawyers, and spectators. The Ogorev case had attracted great attention. Too many scandalous details, too many influential figures turned out to be involved in this story. Damir sat in the first row, clutching a folder of documents in his hands. Valentin Ogorev entered the hall accompanied by 2 guards. He wore an expensive suit, his hair carefully arranged. He carried himself with ostentatious dignity, as if he were not being judged, but rather had condescendingly accepted to attend a formal event. His gaze slid across the room and stopped on Damir. For a second, hatred flashed in Ogorev's eyes, but he immediately composed himself and sat on the defendant's bench. Stepan Ogorev looked worse. The 30-year-old man who had hidden behind his father all his life now seemed lost and scared. He was nervous, avoiding looking into the room. On his face, one could read the realization that now there was no one to defend him. The judge opened the session. The case of the accusation of Valentin Ogorev for forgery of documents, illegal adoption, involvement in the death of Irina Arslanova, and organization of a criminal group is being judged. Also, the case of Stepan Ogorev is being examined under the charge of torture of a minor. The floor is given to the prosecutor. The prosecutor stood up and began to expose the essence of the accusation. He methodically listed the facts: how Ogorev organized the framing of Damir Arslanov 9 years ago, appropriating his business; how he manipulated Irina, who was pregnant, bringing her to a state of psychological collapse; how he organized the falsification of the documents regarding her death; how he illegally adopted her daughter, Marta,
using a fake letter and bribing an employee from Child Protection Services. Why did Ogorev adopt the child? The prosecutor paused, sweeping his gaze across the room. This question occurs to anyone. Why did an influential businessman need a stranger's child, and specifically the daughter of the man he himself sent to prison? The answer is simple and cynical.
Marta was the last of Ogorev's crimes, the living proof that Irina was pregnant, that she died under mysterious circumstances. To give the little girl to an orphanage meant creating the risk that someday she would grow up, start asking questions, find documents, reopen her mother's file. But if the child is under Ogorev's total control, if she is isolated, intimidated, deprived of information about the past, she will never become a threat. Marta was not a daughter to Ogorev. She was an insurance policy, a living guarantee that his crimes would remain buried together with her mother. The prosecutor placed his hand on the stack of documents. Ogorev kept the little girl in fear, humiliated her, forced her to erase the memory of her mother. He was erasing her past to bury his own crimes as well. This is not charity. It is a calculated and cold-blooded crime against a child. We have the statements of the doctor Kirill Zotov, the prosecutor continued, who admitted that he signs the backdated death certificate at Ogorev's request. Zotov claims he saw signs of violent death on Irina Arslanova's body, a strangulation groove on her neck. However, instead of going to the police, scared by the accused's threats, he accepted the money and falsified the documents. A murmur was heard in the hall. Journalists were writing things down. Cameras flashed.
Ogorev sat motionless, his face impenetrable. Furthermore, the prosecutor continued, we have recordings of Stepan Ogorev's discussions with the minor Marta, where he threatens her, intimidates her, humiliates her. There is the medical certificate regarding the blows inflicted on the child. There are the statements of the witness, the inspector from Child Protection Services, regarding the inadmissible living conditions of the little girl. All of these indicate systematic physical and psychological violence against the child. He paused, then continued. Valentin Ogorev built his empire on lies, betrayal, and crimes. He destroyed the lives of innocent people for personal profit. He deprived Damir Arslanov of his freedom. He deprived Irina Arslanova of her life. He deprived Marta Arslanova of her childhood. And now he must answer for his actions with the full severity of the law. The prosecutor sat down. The judge turned to Ogorev's lawyer. The floor to the defense. Ogorev's lawyer, a tall man with glasses, stood up from his seat. He was one of the best criminal lawyers in the city, known for his ability to get clients out of the most desperate situations. Your Honor, the prosecution relies on assumptions and indirect evidence. Yes, the documents were drawn up with violations, but where is the proof that my client is personally involved in the death of Irina Arslanova?
Zotov's statements are the words of a man who himself admitted to a crime and is now trying to cast blame on another to lighten his sentence. He continued, gesturing. Regarding Marta's adoption, my client acted out of noble intentions. The child was left an orphan, and he took her into his family. Yes, mistakes were made in drawing up the papers, but that does not make him a criminal. That makes him a man who tried to help a child and committed a procedural violation. But the beatings? The judge asked sharply. The medical certificate confirms multiple traces of physical violence. That is the deed of my client, Stepan Ogorev, not Valentin's, the lawyer parried. Valentin cannot answer for the actions of his adult son.
Yes, perhaps Stepan was too strict in his education, but this is a family matter, not a criminal offense. Damir sat silently, but he was boiling inside. This man was trying to whitewash Ogorev, to present him almost as a benefactor. He wanted to jump up and shout the truth, but he restrained himself. The judge called the first witness. It was Kirill Zotov. The doctor came to the stand, pale and emotional. He confirmed the statements given to the investigation, that he recorded the death as natural and backdated it at Ogorev's request and for a lot of money. Why did you accept? Asked the judge.
Because I was afraid. Ogorev is an influential man. He told me directly that if I refused or went to the police, they would find me dead. I feared for my life. I took the money and did what he asked. How much did they pay you? 2 million rubles. An uproar rose in the hall again. Ogorev whispered something furiously to his lawyer. The next witness was Albina Melnikova. She recounted how Ogorev manipulated Irina, planted the idea that Damir was a criminal, and gradually isolated her from friends and acquaintances. Irina was desperate, Albina said, wiping her tears. She felt abandoned, alone. Ogorev took advantage of that. He told her that only he could help her, that only he was on her side.
She believed him because there was no one else. And after her disappearance, did you try to find out what happened? Yes, I went to the police, but they told me the death was officially registered. There were no suspicions. Ogorev had already organized everything so that no traces remained. Then they called the inspector from Child Protection Services. She described in detail the conditions in which Marta lived in the Ogorev family home. The child slept in the closet, on the floor. She had no normal clothes, toys, personal space. On her body, traces of blows. She was intimidated, afraid to speak. It is one of the most serious cases of cruelty towards children that I have seen in my practice. Finally, they called Damir. He stood up and approached the stand. All eyes were fixed on him. Tell the court how you found out about the existence of your daughter, the judge requested. Damir inhaled deeply. I was released after 9 years spent in prison under a false accusation. Ogorev framed me, fabricated evidence to seize our joint business. The first thing I did after my release was to go to my wife's grave. There I met a little girl. She said it was her mother's grave. When I learned her first and last name, I understood. She is my daughter.
The daughter I didn't know existed. His voice trembled. Irina was pregnant when they arrested me. She didn't get the chance to tell me about it. Ogorev took advantage of her condition, manipulated her, drove her to death, and then took our child. He stole everything from me. My freedom, my wife, my daughter, years of my life. And now I demand justice. You claim that Ogorev organized your framing. Do you have proof? Yes. The investigation pulled up the archives of my file. Inconsistencies in documents, fake signatures, and fabricated financial reports were discovered there. All of this indicates that the case against me was falsified. Who could do that? Only a person who had access to the company's finances. Only my partner, Valentin Ogorev. Ogorev could no longer remain silent. He jumped from his chair. It's all a lie. Arslanov's guilty of embezzlement. I only helped the investigation discover his crime. Silence, defendant, the judge raised her voice. You will speak when you are given the floor. Ogorev sat down, but his face burned with fury. The trial continued for several days. Experts and witnesses were called. Documents were studied. Gradually, the picture became clearer and clearer. Ogorev had indeed organized the framing of Damir to seize the business. He had indeed manipulated Irina, bringing her to psychological collapse. He had indeed organized the falsification of the documents regarding her death, although there was no direct evidence that he personally killed her. The indirect clues were sufficient to open a file for causing suicide and negligence resulting in death. Stepan Ogorev's guilt in torturing the child was proven beyond doubt. The recordings of the conversations, the medical certificates, Marta's statements, all of these left no room for doubt. His lawyer tried to prove it was ordinary upbringing, but the court did not accept these arguments. Finally, the day of the sentencing arrived. The hall was packed. The judge read the sentence. Valentin Ogorev is found guilty of forgery of documents, illegal adoption, organization of criminal activity, and causing the death of Irina Arslanova. He is sentenced to 12 years in prison in a strict regime colony and confiscation of assets. Ogorev went white. 12 years. He would be an old man when he got out.
Stepan Ogorev is found guilty of torturing a minor. He is sentenced to 5 years in prison in a general regime colony. Stepan hung his head. He knew he had gotten off lightly compared to his father. The judge struck with the gavel. The session is closed. After the trial, Damir came to Marta's school to pick her up. She clung to him, hiding her face in his chest. He stroked her head, unable to control his tears. "It's over," he whispered. "Everything is fine now." Marta raised her eyes to him. "Is it true that they will never take me again?" "Never. You are with me forever." Damir got behind the wheel of the second-hand car he had bought, with the money received as compensation for the years spent in the colony for a crime he had not committed. Marta sat in the back seat, fastening her seatbelt. He started the car and drove far away from this nightmare. "Where are we going?" asked Marta. "Home. To your grandmother's house?" "To your mother's?" "Yes. She died while I was imprisoned. But the house remained." "That is where we will live." Marta thought about it. "But can I invite my friends from school there?" "Of course. It is your home now. You can do whatever you wish there." The little girl smiled for the first time since he had known her, a smile of a real child, sincere, who finally felt safe. Damir drove the car through the evening city, and there was peace in his soul. The battle was over. Ogorev had received what he deserved. Marta was by his side. Damir had been completely rehabilitated. His name was clean. The business that Ogorev had once taken from him would return to him by court decision. The compensation included not just money, but also a share of the company. Ahead was a new life, hard, complicated. Both bore the scars of the past, but they were together, and that was the main thing. "Dad," said Marta softly. "Yes?" "I was afraid you would leave, that you would leave me alone." Damir stopped the car on the side of the road and turned to her. "Marta, listen to me. Never, do you hear? Never will I leave you. I lost 9 years of your life. I didn't know you existed. But now that I have found you, I will not let you go. You are my daughter, my family, and I will be with you always." Marta began to cry softly, relieved. Damir got out of the car, sat in the back seat, hugged her, and they stayed like that for a few minutes, simply holding each other. Two people whom fate had separated and brought back together again.
When the tears dried, they drove on. The house was not far, an old one, with 2 stories, on the edge of the city, where Damir had grown up. His mother had died while he was imprisoned, and the house had stood empty all these years. But now it would come to life again. It would fill with voices, with laughter, with life. They went inside. The house was dusty, abandoned, but welcoming. Damir turned on the light, opened the windows to let in the fresh air. "This will be your room," he said, pointing to one of the bedrooms upstairs. "We will do renovations. We will buy new furniture. You alone will choose how it will be." Marta looked at the room with delight. "Is this all mine?" "All yours." She walked in slowly, looked around. The room was large, bright. From the window, the view opened onto the garden. "Dad, but do you have a photo of Mom?" "Of course I have." "Can I hang her photo here? And will you tell me about her? What was she like?" Damir sat next to her on the old sofa. "I will tell you. I will tell you everything. About how we met, how we loved each other, how we were happy. You will get to know your mother, I promise you." Marta leaned against him, and they sat like that, looking out the window at the sunset sky. Somewhere up there was Irina, and Damir believed that she saw them, saw how he had found their daughter, how he brought her home, how a new life began, that life which had been stolen from them, but which they had managed to win back. Half a year had passed since the trial. Winter gave way to spring, and the city was gradually coming to life after the cold. Damir stood at the window of his office and looked at the street, where the first leaves were unfolding on the trees. Life was returning slowly but surely to its normal course. The house, which had been empty for 9 years, was now full of life. Damir had done renovations, bought new furniture,
arranged Marta's room just as she had wanted. Light wallpaper with butterflies, a white desk, shelves for books, a soft carpet on the floor. The little girl fell asleep every evening in her bed, under the warm duvet, and no longer feared that they would wake her with a scream or a blow. Psychologists were helping her recover.
Twice a week, Marta went to sessions with a child psychologist, a woman named Olga, who specialized in working with traumatized children. At first, Marta was silent, did not trust, was afraid to open up, but gradually the ice melted. She began to talk about her fears, about what she lived through in the Ogarev family home, about how much she missed the mother she did not remember. Damir attended some sessions. Olga explained to him how to behave correctly with a child who has survived violence, how not to apply pressure, not to demand too much, how to give her time to regain trust in the world. He listened carefully, remembered every word. Being a father turned out to be harder than he thought, especially when your daughter carries so much pain inside. But he learned every day, learned to be better. School helped too. Marta transferred to a new school, closer to home. The teachers knew about her situation and treated her with understanding. Her classmates welcomed her well. She made her first real friends, Elena and Ekaterina, two cheerful little girls who often came to visit them. Damir heard their laughter coming from Marta's room, and his heart filled with warmth. His daughter was learning to be a child, learning to rejoice, to laugh, to be a friend. The business was also gradually recovering. By court decision, Damir received back his share of the company, which Ogarev had once taken from him. The company was in decline. Without honest leadership, it had slid into debt and lawsuits. Damir set about turning it around, hired new people, reviewed contracts, restored relationships with clients. This took a lot of time and strength, but he was managing. He invested the money from the compensation for illegal detention into the development of the business and the furnishing of the house. Today was a special morning. Damir took the day off to spend it with Marta. They were going to go to the cemetery to visit Irina. Marta herself had asked for this last night. "Dad, I want to visit Mom," she said, sitting at dinner. "I want to tell her how well we are doing. Will you take me?" "Of course, we are going," Damir answered, and his voice trembled. In the morning, they bought a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, Irina's favorite flowers, and left for the cemetery. Marta sat in the car, clutching the flowers to her chest. She was thoughtful and silent. "What are you thinking about?" asked Damir. "About Mom. I wonder what she was like. You told me a lot, but I still can't really imagine her." "She was kind, very kind and strong. She liked to laugh." She had such a contagious laugh that everyone around her started to smile. She liked to read, especially detective novels, and she made an extraordinary apple pie. "Will you teach me to bake it?" "I'll try, although I'm not sure I remember the recipe, but we will try." They arrived at the cemetery. The spring sun illuminated the alleys. Birds were singing in the trees. Everything was so different from that cold day when Damir had come here for the first time after his release and had met his daughter. They approached the grave. The monument was clean. Damir came here regularly, took care of the resting place. Marta placed the flowers at the base of the monument, crouched down, and touched the cold stone. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "It's me, Marta. I came to tell you that now I have a dad, a real dad. He is kind, he takes care of me, takes me to school, helps me with homework. We live in a big house. I have my own room and friends. I am not afraid anymore." Her voice trembled, but she continued, "I am sorry that I don't remember you, but Dad tells me about you. He says you were the best mother in the world. I wish you were here so we could be together, you, me, and Dad. But I know that such a thing is not possible. That's why I just want to say thank you for giving birth to me, for loving me, even if I don't remember that. I will remember you always." She fell silent, wiping her tears.
Damir knelt beside her. He put his hand on the monument, closed his eyes. "Irina," he began, "I found our little girl. I brought her back. Forgive me for being so late. Forgive me that I couldn't protect you then. But I promise you, I will protect her now. I will do everything so she is happy, so she has the life you wanted to offer her." He opened his eyes, looked at the photo on the monument. Irina was smiling from it, young, beautiful, full of life. "She looks like you," continued Damir, "just as stubborn, just as kind. She will manage. We will manage. Together." Marta took his hand. They stood like that for a few minutes in silence, listening to the singing of the birds and the rustle of the wind in the leaves. Then Marta stood up. "Let's go, Dad. We have to go home." "Let's go." He stood up, dusted off his knees. They walked along the cemetery alley towards the exit. Marta stopped suddenly and looked at him. "Dad, but are you happy?" Damir fell into thought. Is he happy? After everything he lived through, after 9 years lost, after Irina's death? He looked at his daughter, at her serious brown eyes, at her fine face, which resembled her mother's face so much, and he understood the answer. "Yes," he said, "I am happy because you are by my side." Marta smiled and squeezed his hand tighter. They left the cemetery and got into the car. Damir started the engine, but didn't leave immediately. He sat looking through the windshield, thinking about the road traveled, from arrest to release, from the meeting with Marta to Ogoriev's trial, from despair to hope. How long this road had been, but they traveled it together. "Dad, what were you thinking about?" asked Marta. "I am thinking about the future, about what awaits us." And what awaits us? Life, a normal, ordinary life. School, work, weekends, holidays, everything that every family should have. "Sounds good," the little girl nodded. Damir smiled and drove the car off the spot. They left for home. 2 lives broken into pieces, but gathered together again. They were going towards their home, towards their new, happy life, which was just beginning.